All right, friends, welcome to our lesson today. Today we're going to be working on painting in an impressionist style with a choice color scheme that is different or adjusted from the original color scheme of the painting. You can see here my setup for paint using tempera paint. The first thing we just want to talk about real quick is to talk about the original color scheme of the painting. So if you take a look at the Starry Night, my original color scheme is in fact blue and yellow. That's the majority of the colors. And so if we look at the color wheel here, blue and yellow, you will notice, are kind of across from each other. They're both primary colors, okay? And they are colors that are kind of directly across from each other, but in a triangle. You see that? So that makes a triangle with red. We're leaving red off because that's not part of this set, but so they have a split relationship, and I did talk that through in my directions. Today I'm going to be creating a split relationship with red-violet and yellow-orange because it has the same relationship as yellow and blue. It's just a little bit off. So that would make a split relationship with blue-green, if you guys see that as I'm moving my finger around and causing the camera to blur. So that's kind of the thing that I'm going to be using today. I'll be using red, violet, and yellow, orange because those are across the screen from each other, or the wheel from each other. It's the same distance that yellow is from blue. So back at my paint here today, you'll notice that to set up with tempera paint, I have a paint palette where I've already started mixing my red and my violet together. So I've got two different tones of red-violet. This one has a lot more violet in it. This one is obviously a lot more red. And the same thing over here with my yellow-orange, where my orange is very much mostly still orange, and my yellow is starting to be tinted a little bit of that orange color, but I'm going to push it a little further. I just want to show you my technique for painting when you're working with liquid paints. So you would start by, in this case, I'm going to be getting a little bit of my orange and I'm going to put it into my yellow. And when I'm mixing here, sometimes it's helpful to have another hand to hold it steady, but since I have to hold my camera, so I can't do that. But you want to mix until all of the color in the bubble or the cup or the plate that you're using, all of that color is all mixed together. You don't want to leave any marbling or any streaks if you don't want them. If you are planning on using marbling and streaks, you're welcome to leave those. But if you're looking for a consistent color that you can use in multiple places in your picture, you want to mix it until there's no more marbling or no more color mixing. So in my picture of Starry Night, I'm going to be creating or recreating those color areas faithfully, and then changing everything that is sort of the blue into my red purple, and everything that is yellow into my more orange orange yellow, or my yellow orange. So mix that up really good. And so to start with, when you're painting, and especially when you're painting in a painterly style, you would actually start by applying your paint in flat coats, and then you apply more paint on top when it's dry. So this is why I have to do this kind of ahead of time, because there are going to be several kind of layers or steps with this. So I actually am going to complete or add or paint a flat coat of my first layer of my kind of yellow orange here, my amber color, and all the places that I had my stars. So this goes here and another one there, and then some of my yellow information in my sky here. And I'm not terribly worried about being perfectly accurate, because the interesting thing about the Impressionist style is the fact that, you know, having those paintbrush marks, having a little bit of three-dimensionality, letting those big chunks sit on the paper is perfectly wonderful. That's kind of the point of what we're doing. We're not trying to hide the fact that this is paint. We're embracing it. We are loving that it's messy and that it kind of goes everywhere. Now, Van Gogh, he would have used oil paints that were maybe a little bit toxic, but we don't want to use those. We will use our tempera, or maybe you have acrylic. If you are using paint at all, if you want to use watercolor, same technique, but just make sure you're making really thick, vibrant colors, because it's such an important part of this art style, is having that kind of bright, vibrant color as part of it. So yeah, I'm doing this. And there was another star sort of down this way, and another one up in here. I forgot to draw some of those, but I'm seeing them up in my painting, so that's what I'm adding there. Oh, and I should have a really nice big bright one right about here. I totally forgot to draw it. So right about in there. Perfect. Okay, so there's my kind of first stage of my orange. So I'm going to let this dry, and then I'm going to come back and keep going on the orange. Now the reason why I'm doing the lighter color first is that the darker color is going to sort of cover it up a little bit because it's heavier, it's darker. So you always want to work and paint from lightest areas to darkest areas. So I'll probably throw some highlights down in this way too. You can add on top again, but it won't be as bright as if it's sitting on the bright white paper. Coming back to my painting now, it's sat for a little while and paint is starting to dry. I'm going to go to my paint palette here, and I'm going to get a little bit of the orange on my brush. Notice that I have not washed out the yellow. I'm actually going to start layering colors by having the colors sort of sit on each other and do that mixing thing on the paper itself. I'm not gonna try to get rid of every little thing and control every little part of it. It's okay for them to be fluid and to have some change and variation. So I might want to go back and add more of the yellow, and then I might want to go back and add some more of the orange, and just kind of going back and forth between these two tones, starting to build up that short little brush stroke information. Pay attention to the direction that you are going when you do your brush strokes. You want to be going in a direction that looks like or mimics the professional, the famous artist that you are sort of being inspired by here. So Van Gogh has very short brush strokes, and they all sort of go with the shape that he's creating. And I'm not trying to cover up all of my paint. I'm just adding some of that information to it. It's all about layering, a little bit at a time, adding more and more. Right. So I'm pretty happy with how this looks. I can keep going. I could go, maybe add a little bit more over here. Maybe I need a little more yellow again. And just sort of build that up a little more, especially like, oh, this little star is kind of sad. I need a little more on that one. But once you're happy with how your looks, if you're using paint, you will start by washing it out, especially if you're going to change colors. Wash it out really good, and then have a second cup, and this is like the final rinse, and then check that it's really clean on a paper towel. Now you'll notice that I didn't get all the way down to my bristles, so I still had some of that paint right at the bottom. So I noticed a little better, still need to get a little more, pretty close. And if it doesn't always wash out with just your hand, you can use your finger to help clean it a little bit. That's better. And rinse. And check that it's clean. No more paint on the paper towel. That's perfect. See, last time there was a little yellow left on. Now it's actually clean. So that brush is ready to go. I could start using it on another color, but I was mixing my paint earlier, so I actually already have a brush that's dirty. This one is red purple, so I have a more purple red purple, and I have a more red red purple, and both are still red purple because they're both those colors mixed together. But I'm going to start with kind of my lighter red purple. Sorry, let me get my finger out of there. And I'm going to be painting the lighter areas of the Starry Night, the ones that are kind of that lighter blue. And that's the ones that I want to paint with the lighter of the purples. So I'm trying to keep the same kind of idea or color family going here. And I'm painting on my table. If you have a table that you can't paint on because you can't wash very well, maybe you better put down some newspaper if you're going to use paint. I know that I can wash my tables really well, so I'm going to make sure I do that. So that's okay. You'll notice that as I'm doing this, I don't have to pay attention to where this shape is because, first of all, my pencil shows through my paint a little bit. And also, that tree shape is very, very dark. So the dark paint will sit right on top of my painted information. And so I don't have to necessarily stop myself from painting. Stop myself from painting that tree. I can get that back pretty easily. So get more paint and keep going. And I'm going to just make sure I'm using those short little brush strokes. Even when you're painting your base coat, you still want to try to practice those short little impressionist brush strokes, because that texture that you're creating by changing the direction of the brush every little bit is going to show in your final artwork. It's going to be visible. It really creates that depth and the thing that's so cool and so interesting. Now I'm going to add some of my darker purple kind of on top in those short little brush strokes. And I'm pretty happy with how that's starting to look. I am going to start now painting my purple in the rest of the background. And then I will cut back and we'll talk about doing the tints and shades and sort of some of those finishing touches. That I have completed my sort of first 2 coats of paint. I have sort of my base coat of my yellows done, my yellow orange, and I have my base coat of my red purple and my more purpley red purple. Now I'm going to spend a little time adding some of the black contrast colors to help sort of define some of my shapes where I've kind of lost them in the fact when, especially down in this area, everything sort of has started blending together. And then you'll notice over here, I forgot to paint part of my original that has a little yellow up in there. So I'm going to repaint that once this is all dry, but I'm going to do the black now because the black can go right on top of anything. Black is your strongest, darkest color. So whenever you're painting with black, you know that that one can go just right on top. No problem. So even if you're painting black though, or drawing with black, or using black anywhere, you still want to think about the brush marks that you're doing, and think about maybe sometimes still having some of those streaks of one of the colors come through and sit on top, and that would happen kind of as you're working. So notice that places where I want a sharp point, like for this part of the tree, I'm starting out there and then drawing towards my big black or dark areas rather than trying to push outwards where I can't necessarily control my brush bristles quite as much. So think about the direction of your brush that you're using, and if you're going to be painting, and moving that around according to the kind of shape that you want. Now I want to sort of bring this down, and I'm going to make this part over here thicker again. And there's a little bit of that, a little aside, painting that. Okay, and bringing this down, painting the other little parts of that bush, that tree, cypress tree I think it is. Add some of those areas of my color right on top while it's wet. Even can look really nice and get sort of blended in there. Then last little bit, we know that this sort of scoots up like that. Really we're looking at all those lines and information, creating that sense of movement in the sky. Van Gogh's paintings are so full of movement because he's using all these short little brush strokes that sort of blend together, create this beautiful sense of life and movement. That's really what we're thinking about, we're focusing on. So I'm going to start adding some of those little lines in the background here. In my darker blue, I want to add some of those little movement lines. I don't need to do a whole giant ton of them. I don't have to do every single little part. In fact, if I do every little single part, it maybe won't work quite as well. And I get some paint and I wipe some of it off to help us out and just pick a few areas that sort of need some help or need some definition, and add a little bit of that black information in there. You don't want to overkill it with the black or with any color really, because then we start losing our information. Like especially in this area, we had that great swirl and now we can't really see it. Well, I'm going to get it back. I'm going to get it back by adding some of our little black lines, and when it all dries, I'll add in back some of the little orange so that it has some interplay there. They can play together, make some really interesting, neat shapes here. Even down in this area, I'm going to add some of my black. Even in my yellow, I want to bring that down. Yellow, orange. And then in the hills, I really want to define those. Help us see those hills. And if you don't get this process, perfectly fine. I mean, I already saw your sketches. I know that you did the drawing, and I can definitely tell that you're trying to do this process of the Impressionist style. You know, say it doesn't turn out exactly as you imagine. Well, guess what? Impressionist pictures are not exactly as we imagine them at the beginning. It's all about the process, and a lot of times it changes. So if you end up making some changes on purpose or on accident, either one, that's legitimate. That is what happens when we make art, and so it's okay. It's totally and absolutely okay. So this should be one of our little houses. Adding in some of our little information here. Little rolling hills. And so as you layer up here, you're going to start to notice and see that things will start to look more and more. You know, if you were to end with that first little hit, no, that won't be finished. It won't look totally done. But as you build, spend the time, build it up. That's where the good stuff comes in. Okay. Some of the finishing steps will happen as you go back to your first color and you start overlaying it along the edges of where it's meeting up with that second color. So as you do that, you'll notice that if you're using Tempera anyway, that color starts to lift off of that color, and that's okay. That's gonna create that kind of that richness, as long as you're being kind of thoughtful with your brush strokes, and if you're noticing that it's getting too much, that you know, do that process of rinsing out. Even my rinse out water is getting kind of dirty because I've been doing this for a little while, and that's okay. But that softening of those edges of places where you were painting around other things and where you're starting to mix those colors, that's going to be those magic places where the colors are really going to start to blend with each other and create some beautiful marks, some beautiful imagery. And that's really what we really want to start building towards.